Chapter 4, Confrontation. The Seraphina's kiss, battered but not broken, shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace near the designated coordinates. Before them loomed Xylos, a planet rendered almost entirely uninhabitable by its own volatile atmosphere, a testament to the Xylosians' indifference to anything outside their ambitions. But nestled within a jagged chasm, shielded by a series of energy shields that shimmered like heat haze in the perpetual twilight, was their target, the Xylosian stronghold, a cyclopean fortress of obsidian and polished chrome. It was a monument to their technological prowess, a testament to their ruthlessness. The stronghold was more than just a base, it was a living organism, pulsating with energy, its surface constantly shifting, a kaleidoscope of defensive measures designed to repel any intrusion. Turret emplacements, sleek and lethal, bristled from every conceivable angle. Energy barriers flickered and rippled, a shimmering curtain of defense against all manner of attack. The very air crackled with the hum of untold power, a silent threat that hung heavy in the void. It was a fortress designed not merely to withstand attack, but to inspire awe and terror. Seraphina, her face grim, studied the holographic projection of the stronghold, the data gleaned from Jax's confession overlaying the image. "This place, it's more heavily fortified than we anticipated," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the Seraphina's kiss's groaning systems. The neurotoxin hadn't fully cleared from Riley's system, leaving him weak but conscious. He leaned against the console, his eyes narrowed in concentration. "The main entrance is protected by a multi-layered defense system," Riley rasped, his voice strained. "Energy shields, automated turrets, sonic disruptors, it's a death trap." Their initial plan, a direct assault, was laughably inadequate. They needed a different approach, a way to bypass the obvious defenses and infiltrate the stronghold undetected. The data Jax had provided, though incomplete, suggested a secondary access point, a hidden tunnel system utilized for supply runs and clandestine operations. It was a risky gamble, relying on outdated information gleaned from a trader, but it was their only option. "We'll need to disable the external sensors first," Seraphina stated, her gaze fixed on the holographic display. "The Xylosian surveillance network is comprehensive. We'll need a sophisticated electromagnetic pulse to temporarily disrupt their systems, create a window of opportunity." Riley nodded, his eyes lighting up with a renewed sense of purpose. "I can jury-rig something. Give me a few hours, and I'll have a pulse generator ready. It will be powerful enough to disable the sensors for a limited time frame." The next few hours were a blur of frantic activity. Riley, fueled by adrenaline and a potent cocktail of stimulants, worked tirelessly, his fingers flying across the console. Seraphina, meanwhile, reviewed Jax's remaining information, piecing together the fragments of his confession. They discovered that the Xylosian leadership was far more fragmented than they had previously thought. Internal power struggles and rivalries were rampant, a fact Jax had exploited to his advantage. The EMP was ready. As the Seraphina's kiss approached the stronghold, Riley unleashed the pulse. The fortress shimmered, its defensive systems momentarily overwhelmed. A brief but crucial silence descended, a void in the cacophony of energy that allowed their shuttle to slip past the outermost defenses unnoticed. They landed in a deserted canyon, miles from the main entrance. The hidden tunnel entrance, a barely discernible crack in the cliff face, was just as Jax had described. The tunnel was dark, claustrophobic, and filled with the stench of damp earth and decaying metal. The journey was slow and treacherous, navigating through narrow passages and treacherous terrain. The air was thick with the silent tension, the fear of discovery palpable. Emerging from the tunnel, they found themselves in a vast underground complex. The air here was noticeably cleaner, circulating through massive ventilation shafts. The sight that greeted them was awe-inspiring, terrifying, and disturbing. The complex was a vast labyrinth of corridors, chambers, and laboratories, a subterranean city teeming with Xylosian activity. They moved silently, their movements precise and calculated, like ghosts in the metallic bowels of the fortress. Seraphina, her movements fluid and graceful, led the way. Her years of espionage training served her well. They avoided patrols, bypassed security checkpoints, and evaded surveillance cameras. Every step was a calculated risk, a dance on the edge of discovery. They reached the Xylotian Central Command Chamber, a vast hall dominated by a massive holographic display showing the entire planet, and an intricate web of information streams showing their movements. They saw themselves on the display, a haunting reminder of how close the Xylotians were to anticipating their every move. At the head of a long, polished obsidian table sat the Xylotian High Council, their faces obscured by shadows, their forms radiating an aura of cold, calculating power. The air hummed with unspoken threats. Riley, despite his weakened state, stood tall. The time for infiltration was over. The confrontation had begun. The fate of the galaxy, it seemed, hung in the balance. This was it. The final showdown. The final confrontation. The next move would decide their fate, and perhaps, the fate of the galaxy. The Xylotian High Council, 5 figures shrouded in darkness, remained impassive as Riley and Serafina entered the command chamber. The holographic display, a swirling vortex of data streams, momentarily flickered, highlighting their intrusion before returning to its usual chaotic dance. Silence, heavy and suffocating, filled the vast hall, broken only by the low hum of the advanced technology surrounding them. The air crackled with anticipation, the unspoken threat of overwhelming force palpable. Riley, despite the lingering effects of the neurotoxin, met their gaze with unwavering resolve. His weakened state was masked by a steely determination that belied his physical condition. Serafina, ever the silent warrior, stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on the hilt of her energy blade. Her eyes, though calm, held a spark of lethal intent, a predator poised to strike. "We expected more pomp and circumstance," Riley said, his voice echoing in the cavernous chamber, cutting through the oppressive silence. His tone was casual, almost mocking, a calculated attempt to unsettle the Xylotian leaders. It was a gambit, a calculated risk to break the tense standoff. A ripple of movement stirred amongst the council members, but their faces remained obscured. A deep, resonant voice, amplified by the chamber's sophisticated sound system, finally broke the silence. "You dare intrude upon the Xylotian High Council. Your audacity is matched only by your foolishness." Foolishness? Riley scoffed, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "I'd hardly call it that. We've infiltrated your impenetrable fortress, bypassed your state-of-the-art defenses, and now we're standing in your very heart. I'd call it efficiency." The response was immediate. Guards, clad in advanced Xylotian battle armor, materialized from the shadows, their weapons primed and trained on Riley and Serafina. The chamber's calm facade shattered, replaced by the chaotic roar of battle. Energy weapons blazed, lasers crisscrossing the hall, impacting with explosive force against the obsidian walls. Serafina moved like a phantom, a blur of motion amidst the chaos. Her energy blade, a shimmering arc of lethal energy, sliced through Xylotian armor with brutal efficiency. She dispatched her opponents with practiced precision, each strike swift and deadly. Riley, though physically weakened, fought with the cunning and ferocity of a cornered animal. He utilized his knowledge of the chamber's layout, exploiting blind spots and narrow corridors to outmaneuver his opponents. He relied on quick thinking and precise movements to compensate for his depleted strength. The battle raged, a furious maelstrom of energy blasts and clashing steel. The holographic display continued to churn, providing a constantly shifting battlefield overlay, showing the unfolding events with chilling accuracy. The Xylotian guards fought with disciplined ferocity, but they were no match for the combined skill and determination of Riley and Serafina. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but not outmatched. As the initial wave of guards fell, reinforcements arrived, pouring into the chamber from hidden doorways and ventilation shafts. The fight intensified, spilling out into the corridors beyond, transforming the once orderly command center into a scene of utter chaos. Explosions rocked the stronghold, sending tremors through the vast underground complex. Riley and Serafina fought their way through a maze of corridors and chambers, their retreat a strategic dance of evasion and destruction. They used the environment to their advantage, utilizing the fortress's layout against the Xylosian forces. They employed a mix of brute force and calculated tactical maneuvers, creating diversions and ambushes to slow down their pursuers. Their escape route led them through the labyrinthine laboratory sections, a testament to the Xylosians' advanced technological capabilities. Here, amidst a chaotic jumble of equipment and half-finished projects, they found unexpected weapons and tools. Serafina disabled several automated defense systems, disabling laser grids and pressure plates, while Riley hijacked a Xylosian transport vehicle, modifying it to breach security checkpoints. Their journey was a whirlwind of close calls and desperate maneuvers. They barely evaded detection countless times, relying on their skills and intuition to stay one step ahead of their relentless pursuers. The sheer number of enemies seemed insurmountable, a constant threat lurking in every shadow. Yet, amidst the chaos and death, their determination remained unbroken. Their courage and tactical brilliance fueled their desperate escape. The chase reached a climax in the vast central atrium, a colossal space filled with massive machinery and towering holographic displays. Here, surrounded by a sea of Xylosian soldiers, Riley and Serafina made their final stand. They leveraged the environment, using the machinery and architectural design to their advantage. They created a series of explosions and strategic diversions, maximizing the element of surprise to whittle down their opponents' numbers. Their energy weapons blazed, a relentless barrage of fire, each shot a carefully calculated strike, aimed to disrupt and disable, to create opportunities for escape. With a desperate last effort, they overwhelmed the final wave of Xylosian forces, buying themselves precious time to escape. Their escape was a harrowing race against time, a dangerous dash through the stronghold's depths, pursued by Xylosian forces determined to eliminate the intruders. They utilized a network of tunnels and hidden passages discovered during their earlier exploration, using their knowledge of the fortress to navigate the complex maze. They used diversions and traps, created using their environment and technological know-how, to hinder their pursuers. Their final escape was a daring maneuver through a maintenance shaft, leading them to a hidden escape pod, their only way to leave the doomed fortress. As the Serafina's kiss jumped to hyperspace, leaving Xylos behind, Riley and Serafina looked back at the planet. The Xylosian stronghold, a monument to ambition and ruthlessness, was a distant, fading memory. Their victory was hard-won, their escape a testament to their courage, skill, and unwavering determination. They had faced overwhelming odds and emerged victorious, leaving the fate of the galaxy hanging in a precarious, yet slightly more hopeful balance. The confrontation was over, but the war was far from won. The escape pod shuddered violently as it cleared the Xylosian atmosphere, the afterburners still screaming their protest against the sudden shift to hyperspace. Riley, his body aching from 1,000 tiny wounds, leaned back against the worn cushioning, the faint scent of ozone filling his nostrils. Serafina, ever composed, monitored the navigation systems, her fingers dancing across the console with practiced ease. The silence, broken only by the hum of the life support systems, was thick with unspoken tension. They had escaped, but the feeling of victory was strangely muted. "That was closer than I'd prefer," Riley admitted, his voice rough. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, a wry smile touching his lips. "I've faced down more heavily armed opponents, but rarely with such sheer numbers." Serafina glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Numbers don't matter against superior tactics," she countered, her voice a low purr. "But their tenacity, that was unexpected." Their escape had been a desperate scramble, a ballet of death performed in the heart of a seemingly invincible fortress. The sheer scale of the Xylosian defenses, the relentless pursuit, had pushed them to the very brink. But then, amidst the chaos of their flight through the maintenance shafts, the unexpected twist had occurred. It began with a data stream, a flicker on one of the countless holographic displays lining the walls. Initially overlooked amidst the pandemonium of laser fire and explosions, Riley had noticed a discrepancy, a pattern that didn't quite fit the Xylosian operational schematics he'd gleaned from intercepted communications. He had initially dismissed it as a glitch, a byproduct of the ongoing battle. But as they fought their way closer to the escape pod, the pattern grew more insistent, more prominent. It was a coded message, subtly embedded within the seemingly random data streams controlling the fortress's security systems. With Serafina's aid, he managed to isolate the message, decrypting it using a combination of Xylosian code-breaking techniques and his own intuitive grasp of programming. The message revealed a shocking truth: the Xylosian High Council wasn't unified. A significant faction, operating in the shadows, was actively working against the Council's official stance. The coded message was a plea for help, a desperate attempt to establish contact with outside forces, namely, them. The message wasn't just a call for assistance. It also contained crucial information about a hidden weakness within the Xylosian security systems, a backdoor, a secret escape route known only to a select few. This information had transformed their desperate flight into a strategic retreat. Instead of blind panic, they were now working with a sliver of inside knowledge, using the rebellion's hidden network to evade the Xylosian forces. The revelation had profound implications. It meant their confrontation hadn't been just a fight for survival, it had been a strategic maneuver in a much larger conflict. Their initial mission, to expose the Xylosian threat, had been unexpectedly complicated, now imbued with moral ambiguity. They had fought alongside a rebellion whose motivations remained unclear, their success now intertwined with the fate of a faction they barely understood. The implications continued to ripple through Riley's mind as they navigated the hyperspace jump. The initial victory felt hollow. They had escaped the fortress, but the war had taken on a whole new dimension. They had uncovered a rebellion, but which side held the true moral high ground remained an open question. Were they merely pawns in a larger game, their survival dependent on the whims of a shadowy rebellion? Serafina, sensing his turmoil, spoke softly. "We've achieved our primary objective," she stated, her voice devoid of emotion. "We've exposed the Xylosian threat. The rest, the rebellion, is a secondary concern for now. We need time to process this information." Riley nodded, slowly. He knew she was right. Their escape was a victory in itself, a testament to their skills and resilience. But the information they had uncovered was a game changer, altering the rules of engagement. They had escaped the Xylosian stronghold, but they had walked into a far more complex and dangerous game. As the Serafina's kiss hurtled through hyperspace, Riley found himself wrestling with the moral ambiguity of their situation. The line between ally and enemy had blurred, becoming impossibly thin. The Xylosian High Council was undeniably evil, but the rebellion also possessed a darkness that Riley could sense, a hidden agenda concealed beneath its facade of freedom. The battle for survival had transformed into a search for truth, a desperate hunt for the true nature of the war they were now engaged in. The rebellion's coded message offered tantalizing clues, hints of a broader conspiracy, whispers of factions within factions, suggesting a web of intrigue far more extensive than they had initially imagined. The Xylosian threat was real, but it was no longer the only threat. The possibility of a darker power manipulating events from the shadows, using the rebellion as a tool to achieve its own nefarious purposes, became a chilling new possibility. Their escape from Xylos was only the first step in a far larger battle. The struggle was no longer about simply surviving. It was now about understanding, about discerning truth from deception, about identifying who the real enemy was. The fight had changed, and so had their roles within it. They were no longer just mercenaries, they were embroiled in a galactic conspiracy, playing a role they hadn't chosen, and barely understood. The days that followed were a blur of frantic activity. They had to analyze the data they had salvaged, decipher the implications of the rebellion's message, and determine their next move. The weight of their newfound responsibility pressed down upon them, a crushing burden made heavier by the uncertainty of the situation. Their initial assessment of the rebellion was tentative, cautious. They reached out to various contacts, using their network of informants to gather more information about this clandestine organization. The whispers they heard confirmed the message's authenticity. A faction within the Xylosian Council had opposed the Council's expansionist policies, their actions driven by a mixture of idealism and self-preservation. But there were undercurrents of something darker, too. The rebellion was not without its own flaws, its own shadowy dealings. Reports of brutality and questionable tactics began to surface. The line between freedom fighters and ruthless opportunists had become blurred, making it increasingly difficult to determine the true nature of their potential allies. Riley and Serafina found themselves caught in a moral quagmire. The rebellion offered a chance to strike a decisive blow against the Xylosian threat, but at what cost? Were they willing to risk aligning themselves with a force whose methods might be as reprehensible as those they were fighting against? As they delved deeper into the situation, the complexity of the situation became overwhelming. The fight for survival had morphed into a struggle for moral clarity, forcing them to constantly re-evaluate their alliances, question their own motives, and grapple with the ethically challenging nature of their mission. Their escape from Xylos had been a victory, but it had also been a pivotal moment. It had marked the beginning of a far more complex and dangerous chapter in their lives, a chapter where the line between good and evil became increasingly blurred. The war was far from over. In fact, it had just begun. The true battle, the battle for truth, was only just starting. And this time, the stakes were far higher than just survival. The fate of galaxies could hang in the balance. The hyperspace jump deposited the Serafina's kiss near the desolate Kepler 186f system, a swirling nebula of purple and crimson serving as a fitting backdrop to their precarious situation. Weeks had bled into months since their escape from Xylos, and the initial euphoria of survival had long since evaporated, replaced by a gnawing unease. The data they'd salvaged, painstakingly analyzed, had painted a grim picture. The Xylosian rebellion, far from being a unified force for good, was fractured, a chaotic tapestry woven from ambition, desperation, and betrayal. Their initial contact, a shadowy figure known only as the Architect, had proven elusive, communicating through encrypted channels and demanding proof of their loyalty before divulging vital information. The Architect's requests were increasingly audacious, demanding risky operations that pushed the boundaries of their moral compass. Riley, ever the pragmatist, argued for caution, pointing out the inherent dangers of blindly trusting a group whose motives remained shrouded in mystery. Serafina, however, saw opportunity in the chaos. Her strategic mind saw a chance to manipulate the rebellion's internal struggles to their advantage, to use their conflicts to weaken the Xylosian High Council. Their first major sacrifice came unexpectedly. Jax, a veteran pilot they'd recruited from their network of informants, had volunteered to infiltrate a Xylosian transport convoy carrying vital resources to the front lines. The mission was suicide, a near-impossible feat of daring even for a veteran like Jax. The information he was expected to acquire would allow them to disrupt the Xylosian supply chain, crippling their war effort. But the risks were monumental. Jax, a gruff but dependable man with a penchant for gambling and a surprisingly soft spot for stray animals, knew the odds. He'd accepted the mission knowing full well it might be his last. His final transmission was a garbled mess, a desperate cry laced with static and the roar of Xylosian fighters. They never heard from him again. His sacrifice, though devastating, bought them invaluable time and crucial intelligence that allowed them to anticipate the Xylosian High Council's next moves. The weight of his death settled heavily on Riley and Serafina, a stark reminder of the brutal price of their war. The loss was more than just the death of a comrade, it was the erosion of their hope, the first crack in their carefully constructed resolve. The second sacrifice was a matter of agonizing choice, a decision that tested the very core of their ethics. They'd uncovered a hidden Xyloshan weapons facility, a site capable of producing bioweapons of terrifying potential. Destroying the facility was paramount, but the only feasible approach involved a daring attack that would necessitate the use of a powerful EMP device. However, the EMP's range was such that it would also wipe out a nearby refugee camp, housing thousands of civilians who had escaped the Xyloshan war zone. The ethical dilemma hung heavy in the air, a suffocating cloud of moral ambiguity. Riley argued vehemently against sacrificing the civilians, advocating for a less destructive approach. Serafina, ever the strategist, countered that the potential devastation of the bioweapons far outweighed the loss of civilian lives. The argument raged for days, each of them weighed down by the gravity of the decision. Ultimately, the choice fell upon Riley, the weight of thousands of innocent lives resting on his shoulders. With a heavy heart, he made the agonizing call. The EMP was activated, the weapons facility reduced to smoldering rubble, but the refugee camp also suffered significant damage. The screams of the wounded echoed in their ears long after the dust settled, a haunting reminder of the brutality of their war. The loss of innocent lives, a consequence of their actions, was a scar that would never truly heal. These sacrifices, while necessary in their pursuit of exposing the Xyloshan threat, had left deep wounds. The moral ambiguity of their actions gnawed at their souls, the weight of their choices pressing down on them like a physical burden. They were no longer just fighting a war, they were fighting against the moral erosion that came with the conflict, constantly wrestling with the question of whether the ends justified the means. Their victories felt hollow, their escapes tinged with regret. The lines between ally and enemy had become blurred, indistinguishable in the swirling vortex of betrayal and deceit. The rebellion, once a beacon of hope, had revealed itself to be a house divided, its leaders consumed by their own ambitions, willing to sacrifice their own people to achieve their goals. The architect, their elusive contact, had become increasingly demanding, his requests growing more reckless and morally questionable. He had begun demanding hostages, bargaining for information with the lives of innocent people. Riley and Serafina were caught in a desperate dance, trying to fulfill his requests while simultaneously trying to undermine his influence within the rebellion. The constant deception, the betrayals, the near misses, had chipped away at their confidence, leaving them exhausted and emotionally depleted. Yet, despite the losses, the sacrifices, and the moral dilemmas that tested their resolve, Riley and Serafina persevered. Their dedication, fueled by a burning sense of justice and a growing understanding of the magnitude of the galactic conspiracy they were embroiled in, kept them going. They clung to the hope that their efforts would ultimately bring about a lasting peace, but the path forward remained treacherous, fraught with peril and uncertainty. The cost of freedom, they were learning, was high, and it was a price they were forced to pay, one casualty at a time. The battle for truth was far from over, and the sacrifices they had made, the lives they had lost, served only as a stark reminder of the stakes involved. The war had changed them, leaving them hardened, but not broken. The fight continued. The air in the Xyloshan stronghold hung thick with the scent of ozone and fear. Riley and Serafina, cloaked in the shadows of a crumbling archway, watched as the architect, their enigmatic contact, addressed a gathering of rebel leaders. He wasn't the wizened, shadowy figure they'd envisioned, but a strikingly handsome man with piercing blue eyes and an unsettlingly calm demeanor. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored Xyloshan uniform, his posture radiating an air of quiet authority that belied the chaos surrounding him. The irony wasn't lost on Riley, the supposed architect of rebellion was dressed like the very system he sought to dismantle. The architect, whose real name they discovered was Theron, wasn't delivering a rousing speech. Instead, he was meticulously outlining a complex strategy, detailing troop movements, supply lines, and the precise timing of a coordinated attack on the Xyloshan High Council. His voice, amplified by hidden speakers, carried through the cavernous hall, resonating with a chilling clarity. He spoke of calculated risks, strategic sacrifices, and the ruthless efficiency required to seize power. There was no room for sentimentality in his plans, no hint of remorse for the collateral damage. But it was the details, the subtle nuances, the almost imperceptible pauses, that sent shivers down Serafina's spine. She noticed the subtle shifts in his gaze, the almost imperceptible twitches in his hands, the almost inaudible hesitations in his speech. These weren't the actions of a revolutionary leader fighting for freedom, they were the actions of a meticulous puppet master, pulling the strings of a vast, intricate game. As Theron continued his address, Serafina recalled a piece of intel they'd intercepted weeks earlier, a coded message detailing the transfer of a vast fortune from a hidden Xylosian account to a shell corporation on the far side of the galaxy. The name of the beneficiary was obscured, but the amount was staggering, enough to fund several large-scale military operations, enough to buy the loyalty of countless individuals. The money trail, they realized, led not to a hidden rebel faction, but to Theron himself. The rebellion wasn't a fight for freedom, it was a meticulously orchestrated power grab. Riley, ever the pragmatist, had initially dismissed the notion. He believed in the cause, in the possibility of genuine resistance against the oppressive Xylosian regime. But Serafina's deductions were too precise, the pieces fitting together with chilling accuracy. The architect wasn't leading a revolution, he was staging a coup d'état. Theron's plan was audacious in its scope, breathtaking in its audacity. He intended to use the fractured rebellion as a tool, exploiting their internal conflicts to weaken the High Council's defenses. Once the Council was vulnerable, he would strike, seizing control of the Xylosian government and establishing himself as the undisputed ruler. His motivations, however, went far beyond mere political ambition. The intercepted data revealed a more sinister goal, one that sent a chill down both Riley and Serafina's spines. The Shell Corporation, they discovered, wasn't just a front for illicit financial transactions. It was a conduit for a far more sinister enterprise, the development and deployment of advanced weaponry, weapons so destructive that they could cripple entire star systems. Theron wasn't just seeking power, he was aiming for galactic domination. The revelation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. They had been pawns in Theron's game, unwitting participants in a larger conspiracy that threatened the entire galaxy. The sacrifices they had made, the losses they had endured, were all part of a grand deception. The weight of this realization was almost unbearable. The moral ambiguity that had plagued them throughout their mission intensified, morphing into a searing sense of betrayal. Their trust had been violated, their sacrifices mocked. They had fought for a cause that was a lie, a facade designed to mask the true intentions of a ruthless mastermind. The confrontation came swiftly, unexpectedly. A small group of rebel soldiers, loyal to Theron, surrounded them, their weapons trained on their heads. The sudden shift in atmosphere was palpable, the jovial camaraderie of the meeting replaced by a deadly tension. The architect, Theron, approached them, his calm demeanor barely betraying the cold calculation in his eyes. "I had hoped it wouldn't come to this," Theron said, his voice devoid of emotion, "but your continued presence is a liability. You've seen too much." Riley, ever the strategist, responded calmly. "You've underestimated us, Theron. We know your true intentions. The rebellion isn't about freedom, it's about your insatiable lust for power." Theron smirked, a chilling expression that revealed the extent of his ruthlessness. "Power is a tool, Riley. A means to an end. And my end is the creation of a new galactic order, an order far superior to the corrupt and inefficient system that currently exists." Serafina saw an opportunity. The shift in mood was palpable, the rebels were beginning to question Theron's authority, to doubt his promises. This was their chance to exploit the brewing dissatisfaction, to sow the seeds of dissent within his ranks. "Your order, Theron," she countered, "will be built on bloodshed and deception. You're no savior, you're a tyrant." She then subtly projected a coded message to their allies, signaling their location and calling for immediate backup. The message, embedded in her own heartbeat, was a secret only their closest allies could decipher. It was a gamble, a dangerous one, but their only hope. The exchange escalated quickly. Accusations flew, doubts surfaced, and a sense of uncertainty washed over the rebel leaders. The carefully constructed facade of unity began to crumble, revealing the deep-seated distrust and conflicting ambitions that lay beneath the surface. The room became a battleground of words and accusations, a maelstrom of conflicting loyalties. Theron, realizing that his grip on power was slipping, attempted to regain control, but the seeds of doubt had already been sown. The ensuing chaos provided Riley and Serafina with their chance. They used the distraction, the swirling vortex of confusion, to their advantage. A brief, brutal fight ensued, the air filled with the sounds of gunfire and the clash of metal. Riley, with his combat skills honed over years of experience, fought with a ruthless efficiency. Serafina, utilizing her strategic mind and years of espionage experience, coordinated their escape route, exploiting the confusion. Their escape was a near thing, a desperate race through the labyrinthine corridors of the stronghold. They narrowly evaded Theron's guards, their movements fluid and precise, each step calculated. They reached the emergency escape pods just as Theron's elite guard closed in. They blasted off into the swirling nebula, leaving behind the crumbling stronghold and the shattered remnants of Theron's meticulously crafted illusion. Their escape, however, was far from a victory. Theron, his true nature exposed, remained a dangerous adversary, a looming threat. The fight for galactic freedom was far from over. The unmasking of the mastermind was a crucial step, but the war had only just begun. They had exposed Theron's plan, but neutralizing him and dismantling his vast network would require a far greater effort, a far greater sacrifice. The road ahead remained uncertain, perilous, and fraught with danger. But with the weight of Theron's deception lifted from their shoulders, they carried the hope for the future. They knew what they were fighting for now, not just the survival of a rebellion, but the future of countless worlds. The battle for freedom, they now knew, was a battle worth fighting.